With my AI Day series just completed, I realized that there was a lot of questions still kind of out there. People have been asking me via email and Twitter, etc. So I figured what I would do is I would do a little question and answer for my Patreon patrons. So here's some questions that my Patreon patrons have asked and my answers, and they're going to be off the cuff. For those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I wanted to do a couple of things with this question and answer thing. Number one was to thank my Patreon patrons very much for, all of your support and everything. So I wanted to allow you all to ask me some questions, so there's a good thing. But I also wanted to kind of go back to the roots of this channel, and for, 99% of the people watching, you have no idea what I'm talking about. If you want to look, there's a really early episode I did on the Cybertruck up here that I'll link. But this channel started, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was October 16th of 2019, so it's just about 2 years old now, and maybe sometime around then I'll do a little retrospective. But the goal of the channel originally was I was calling myself a know-it-all, right? And that's not really the most, kind thing to call yourself. It's usually something you say, to somebody else and you're like, oh, that person's a know-it-all, and it's not a good thing. I was the kid who was in kindergarten, and literally my parents got called in because, when I was 5 years old, they said, can you please quiet, the teacher said, can you please quiet John down, because he just goes like this all the time. He's like, I know the answer, I know the answer. So this is something I've come by honestly throughout my entire life. I have always been kind of one of those kids who's always interested in telling you the answer, not just knowing, but also sharing the answer with you. But anyway, the whole know-it-all thing, right? My sister used to call me a know-it-all when I was growing up, and then my wife called me a know-it-all, and a lot of my friends called me that. So I thought about naming the channel Mr. Know-It-All as kind of a wink, and that's why there's a question mark, because it's like, really, do I know it all or not? But anyway, when I realized, I was like, wait, I've got a PhD, so let's just call it Dr. Know-It-All instead. So that's where this comes from. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek channel name. Perhaps in retrospect, not the greatest name in the world to start the channel with, because it's a little bit derogatory to myself, but what the heck. Just so you know, I always take everything, lightly. I don't take myself too terribly seriously. I've always told people, if I insist that you call me Dr. Gibbs, then I don't like you very much, because most of the time John is totally fine. Or Dr. Know-It-All. You can call me that too if you want to. Anyway, the original format of this channel was that viewers or friends, it started off just being friends because I didn't have a lot of viewers, but people would ask me questions, and then I would, kind of open up a piece of paper, I would look at it, and I would give an answer immediately, and I'd either get a thumbs up or a thumbs down, depending on whether I answered correctly. So I figured, since I was doing kind of a Q&A anyway, why not just do it that way? So my lovely wife, who goes by Misinformation on Discord, and yes, I know, Dr. Know-It-All, misinformation. Anyway, she put together these questions on cardstock, no less. So I haven't seen these before, I'm not looking at them right now, but I'm going to read them, and I'm going to answer them the best that I can, and if I don't know the answer, I will let you know. And also, before we start, just a really quick shout out about this. This is awesome. Physics is the law, everything else is a recommendation, with the speed of light down here, which is a really big speed limit, right? So anyway, that's on my merch store if you want to take a look. And also, the new Tesla bot tumblers are they are so good looking in person. Nice job, Dan. In fact, I think Dan has one of the questions in here, so we will get to it. We'll see. Anyway, enough preamble. Let's get to the questions. So Norm asks, why are we so focused on full self-driving for tight, unpredictable city streets when the interstate and highway system full self-driving works so flawlessly? Good question. So I would say, in the sense that it's kind of already done. I mean, Tesla has sort of solved this, and I don't know, there's other companies that kind of sort of have. I mean, the whole thing with Ford and Blue Cruise and Sandy Munro's drive with the Ford engineer, and it was a little embarrassing. But anyway, there's other companies that say that they do this also on the highways. So I think part of what Tesla is saying is that they're like, okay, so we pretty much already do the interstate system pretty well. I think maybe what Norm is asking a little bit about is perhaps what Tesla should do is they should tout the fact that they're really, really good on the highways. But that's also kind of not what Tesla does. Tesla doesn't really go like, oh, we've already done this and rest on our laurels. They're always interested in the next step. And of course, the next step here is that city streets and city driving is insanely more complicated than driving on the highway, right? Limited access highways, you pretty much, if you stay in your lane and you can turn and you can stay away from the guy in front of you, you're covering most of highway driving. And if you can shift lanes also and take an exit, that, which is what Teslas already do, that's pretty fantastic. So you're pretty much most of the way there. But, having to make much, much more difficult turns like 90-degree or even greater turns, that's really hard. Having to deal with pedestrians, parked cars, people coming at you from every sort of direction, different sorts of roads, those are really, really difficult problems to solve. And I think it's just that Tesla really wants true level 5 autonomy. And until you can do all of those things on the city streets as well as on the highway, it's not really level 5 autonomy. It's an advanced driver assistance system or an ADAS as opposed to really full self-driving. So Tesla is really focused on getting the full self-driving thing done. And in order to do that, you have to be able to drive on city streets as well as on the highway. So I think that's why they're so focused on that. As for why they don't advertise better that they are on the highways, well, Tesla doesn't really have a PR department. So that's their problem. Whether or not you agree with that being a good idea, that's the way that they go. All right, question number 2. The Wiz asks, how well will the AI spot potholes? Does it send data of bumps in the road, etc., i.e. potholes, speed bumps, speed lumps, dips, etc.? Is it detecting blinkers and taillights yet? What's currently the hardest thing to label? Whew, that's a lot of questions. Okay, so road surface wise, I actually don't know. I watched AI Day very carefully, and they definitely said they modeled discontinuities in the road. So that would indicate to me that they are taking account of potholes and stuff. One thing about like potholes or damage to the road or something is that's fairly temporary, right? Pothole appears and hopefully within a couple of weeks somebody comes out and fixes it. But with cars driving over these roads many times and the fact that Tesla is combining that information, certainly I think that they're labeling that kind of thing so that the cars can hopefully avoid it. But the question then becomes, do they memorize this, right? So it's a different thing to label something, right? So labeling a pothole is saying there's a pothole, you should avoid it. And so if the car sees that, it actively avoids that, even if it's not the same pothole, right? It's identifying that kind of a thing, a discontinuity in the road. It's a different thing if the cars actually communicate, up to the mothership and say, hey, on 25th Street at this particular location, there's a pothole in the left-hand lane, right? So that would be the kind of thing that I don't know that they do. I think they're actually counting on the car driving more like a human being does, which is you're driving along, you see a big hole in the road and you avoid it, right? So I think that's more their strategy, but I don't know. They might actually have some sort of communication and some sort of basic information sharing between cars. Now, it wouldn't be like from one car to another, but it'd be up to the mothership and back down again, something like that. But they could definitely have that. And just real quick, detecting blinkers and taillights. So I know in the non-beta version, and it's very frustrating that it really doesn't do that very well. So, I'll be driving along on the highway or something, and I'll see a car in front of me turn its lights on, and the car is driving itself. And I'm like, oh, turn the brakes on, turn the brakes on, turn the brakes on. And the car's getting closer, and then finally it turns the brakes on when it detects the other car slowing down. But it's not reacting like I do. As soon as I see the red tail lights go on, I immediately take my foot off the gas or accelerator pedal and I start to prepare to brake, right? So the car feels like it's very late. I believe that the beta version actually does take account of this, and anybody who's driving the beta, definitely let me know in the comments or send me an email or something like that. But I would love to know that. I believe that the beta versions, the new vision-only beta versions, do actually take account of that. But as I'm not driving that yet, hopefully in about 2 weeks, I will be driving it. But anyway, right now I have no way of proving or disproving that. So anybody who is driving the beta, I would love to find out from you whether the car is actually taking account of brake lights and stuff. All right, next question. Tom asks, could full self-driving use AI to protect itself from being hacked? I think this is actually a little bit broader than full self-driving. This is more or less, can the car protect itself from being hacked? And I believe there was something in the Ukraine that happened where somebody hacked a Tesla and was able to kind of access the car without having, the correct rights to that. So certainly, the smarter a car gets, the more being hacked is a big deal. And I think that that's something that Tesla and anybody else who's in this space really needs to take account of. Certainly the worst possible scenario would be if you were driving the car, especially if it was in the future and the car had no steering wheel or brakes or anything. So you're just a passenger in the car and somebody hacked it and, then like steered it off the road or something and crashed it, right? That would be a really, really bad, tragic problem to have. So Tesla needs to make sure that the full self-driving, but the car itself is not hackable. So there's a difference. If the car's parked in a parking lot and somebody comes up and does a local, hack and they're able to get into the car and drive it away, that sucks and that's no good. But that's not the same thing as when the car is driving in full self-driving and it's hacked actively while you're moving in the car. I would hope that Tesla locks the car down when it's driving, right? You certainly can't do a software update or something like that when the car is driving. So I think the car is, my understanding, at least from driving it, and it feels this way, is that the car is removed from the outside world when it is driving, right? It's sandboxed itself. So the full self-driving features and everything are, and just the car driving itself, right? Because you're kind of driving by wire to some extent with the accelerator and everything. So I think all of that stuff is localized and taken off the grid, so to speak, while you're driving. But it would only be while you're parked or charging or something that the car would actually be accessing the grid and saying, hey, can we do software updates? And so it would probably, the way that hacking is likely being done right now is somehow getting into the sort of software update sort of stack and attacking it that way. And that is not accessible while you're driving. So I hope, right? One would hope that the car is pretty much unhackable while it's moving. Certainly it would be nice to also know that the car is unhackable while it's sitting still because you don't want your car stolen or driven away. But at the very least, I would hope that Tesla really locks the car down. So again, don't know this for sure because I don't have access to internal Tesla data. And if I did, I wouldn't be able to tell you that. But I assume that Tesla is pretty careful about the whole hacking thing. And so I would hope that it would be very, very difficult to impossible to hack the car while it's in motion. All right, then we get Hydra Fighter. Oh, he says you're awesome. Thank you so much. It has 2 questions. Number 1, what are your favorite books? And number 2, if you were starting a higher education now, what would you study? I guess starting in higher education. What would you study? What would you think would be the most valuable in the future to study now? Okay, so let me start with question number 2 first. Question number 2, I think if I was starting higher education now, I'd probably do what I did recently, which would be to go into artificial intelligence. I really like the way that University of Georgia's AI program is set up because it's kind of a balance between computer science and psychology and philosophy. And I think my sort of educational bent is to synthesize as much as possible. I know that comes as a shock to all of you, but that ability to synthesize things from different disciplines and utilize them in a practical way is really important to me. So I think that that's where I go into. If I was going to start now, I'd probably do an undergraduate in AI or at the very least computer science or something. And I actually wanted to do computer science at Princeton in the 1980s, but they really didn't have computer science. They had electrical engineering with a focus in computers or in programming, I don't know. Anyway, it wasn't specific enough for me, and so I decided to do physics instead, which I don't regret now. I mean, it was super, super hard, but learning the fundamental principles, learning the laws is very important. But if they had had computer science as a subject there, then I probably would have majored in that as opposed to physics. So anyway, I think AI would be what I would go into. And the first question, books. Oh gosh. I really suck at answering that question. Like, what's your favorite book or what's your favorite movie? It's sort of like, what do you think of immediately? I guess since I thought about it recently and talked about it in a video, certainly Dune and the Dune series, but at least the book Dune by Frank Herbert is one of my favorites of all time. I'm a huge fan of world-building science fiction or world-building fantasy fiction. I love George R.R. Martin's, Game of Thrones, or Song of Fire and Ice, series. Game of Thrones being the first book. And really wish that he would come out with books 6 and 7. Maybe it would be nice. Anyway, I love that. But, the Dune universe that Herbert builds up is just incredible. I think, Xixin Liu, or Liu Xixin, it should be backwards of that. Chinese writer, probably a lot of Americans and English speakers don't know about him, but there's well-translated books on Amazon and other places, and I'll put a link or something in the description. It's incredible. He has a trilogy of books that starts with the 3-body problem and then the Dark Forest, and I can't remember the name of the third one. But basically it goes from now, or actually the past, all the way up to the end of the universe. I mean, literally that. So can't get much bigger than that in terms of scope. But it's really fascinating because the thing about fiction, and I read a lot of nonfiction too, but I always feel like fiction is the thing that really sticks with me and changes my life more than nonfiction. And I know I'm different than a lot of other people about that, but I feel like fiction, you've got authors who are really confronting the nature of the universe, and they're thinking about human relationships, but also, in science fiction, they're thinking about what are the implications of how things are moving. I've got a couple of screenplays that deal with that myself. Haven't ever sold, but if anybody's a movie producer and you want to look at my screenplays, I'd be happy to show you. But anyway, this book in particular, The Three-Body Problem, starts with a conceit that there are aliens, and what they do to kind of derail humanity is destroy our ability to do fundamental research. I'm not going to tell you much more than that in case you want to read it. I don't want to spoil it. And like I said, it goes to the end of the universe, so that's just the beginning of the whole thing. But it's fascinating to think about that because basically Liu's contention is that if you get rid of fundamental research, the first principles research, and the ability to discover new things, everything then just turns to engineering, and there's only so far you can go in that realm before you run out of steam, right? You have to make new discoveries in order to build upon those new discoveries. So it's a fascinating conceit and really interesting place to start the book series out with and everything. So anyway, one that everybody's heard of probably in the English-speaking world is Dune, and the movie's coming out soon, but you should definitely read the book because the book is amazing. It's like 50, well, it came out the year I was born, so it's 56 years old right now, 1965. But anyway, fantastic book. That's something that I just think is amazing, but I also think you should definitely look at Liu's trilogy. Again, starts with The Three-Body Problem and then on. I think if you like that kind of world-building, gigantic fiction, just kind of going like, how the hell did this person think of all these things, right? If you're into that kind of stuff, you will absolutely love these books. And they also give you an insight into the sort of Chinese confrontation with science and with fiction and everything. So I think that's valuable in its own right. I wish I could read it in the original, but of course I can't, so I have to read it in English. See, I don't know it all. All right, then we get John, who asks, where will all the US electricity come from in 2030? Commercial, industrial, residential, transportation. Numbers, please. Oh, Lord. I don't know if I can give you numbers offhand. 2030, and he said the US, yeah. So I think, gosh, I don't know that we can actually specify for the entire United States, because you have to remember the United States is 50 states, and they're not particularly united right now. There's a pretty big difference between a lot of these states and what the populations are feeling about different social and political issues. So I would say certainly states like California, West Coast states, perhaps a lot of the more northeastern states, those are going to go as much renewable as possible. So they're going to be producing most of their energy renewably. I think the middle of the country might be laggards and might still be using coal or natural gas in the future up to 2030. I think by 2040 that's unlikely because it'll be environmentally so damaging, but also they're just going to run out of these natural resources if they keep using them like that. So I think eventually solar, wind, maybe nuclear, because molten salts and things like that. The modern thorium-based nuclear reactors are actually pretty safe and don't produce a lot of damaging radioactive material and would be really good kind of base level power. So I'm a big, advocate of modern nuclear facilities. The problem is that the political will to do that is not around in the United States. But anyway, so I think, getting rid of as much polluting like coal, natural gas, oil. I don't know if anybody produces electricity on massive scales using oil. But anyway, getting rid of those things and moving towards renewable or relatively non-polluting technologies is definitely the way to go. As far as the amount of electricity that's being produced, I think that again, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but certainly there's going to have to be more electricity produced in 2030 than right now, simply because we're moving very rapidly to EV, battery-based transportation. And the more we do that, we have to shift our energy grid, right? If you have 100% energy and 50% of it is oil-based for transportation and stuff, and another 50% is electrically based, as we get more EV cars and the transportation segment of the energy is being utilized more by electric cars, battery operated things, etc., then you're going to have to shift the balance. And so eventually it could be 80 or 90% electrical production and only a small percent oil and gas production. And I think that's all to the good, because electrical production, like I said, can be done in a much, much cleaner manner than oil and gas. Oil and gas is always going to be polluting, and it's only going to get harder to get, right? Because you have to dig it out of the ground to get there. So it's only going to decrease in its value and increase in its polluting capabilities. So the less we're using that, the better. The danger, of course, is that what could happen, or what will happen, I think, would be that we will see the price of oil and gas and petroleum skyrocket, because the less interest there is in it and the less subsidizing there is for it, the more it's going to cost to get every barrel of oil or something. So petroleum products and stuff could be quite interesting. They could end up costing a lot more, like, right, synthetic materials that your shirts are made out of. I think this is mostly cotton, actually. But anyway, if you have synthetic materials, I guess, the plastics on my microphone and these cords and all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, whatever kind of plastics, those could become much more expensive, because those are kind of a byproduct of searching for, fuel oil. And when you don't have that search anymore, it's going to become more expensive to produce plastics. So that could be an interesting outcome. One thing somebody asked me today was about Norway, and whether Norway has seen a significant reduction in the amount of petrol stations, gas stations there, and an increase, a balanced increase in the number of supercharger or charger stations that are out in the world. So anybody from Norway, hit me up in email, Twitter, or leave a comment in the comments. I don't read all of the comments, sorry, so many of them. So if you really want to let me know, definitely email me that information. But I would love to find out, anybody who's from Norway or other Scandinavian countries that have moved rapidly towards EV adoption, I would love to find out your thoughts about that. All right, and then we get a question from Misinformation, my wife. When are you going to take your wife to Tulum, Mexico? Well, okay. I don't know. When I hit 100,000 subscribers, how about that? So I guarantee you she'll have it at 100,000 subscribers by next week. If that's the case, she'll figure out some way to make that happen. I don't know, sweetheart. We'll go as soon as we can figure out a time in our incredibly busy schedules and school and all of that stuff. But that would be lovely. Anyway, if anybody wants to help me get to 100,000 subscribers, I really want that stupid little YouTube silver play button. But anyway, I don't know. We'll see. Now that I've set it out that I said when we get to 100,000, I'll take her to Tulum. Maybe she'll make sure that happens rapidly. We will find out. All right. Anyway, thank you for that question. JS asks, when Tesla receives a battery from a supplier, what testing is done on it? Can the testing predict longevity? Is this called validating? Do they validate every cell or every 100 per million or something? Ooh, okay, I actually do not have the answers to this. Oh, sorry. I'll tell you what I think, but I don't have the answers to this, so I'm not positive that I'm correct about this. Now, my assumption is that they do some maybe basic testing. Well, I do know some things. Okay, they definitely burn in the battery packs. So they have huge racks, and I'll try to find a picture of this to put up here, but they have these gigantic racks where they actually charge the batteries up, right? So the initial couple of charge cycles really kind of sets the amount of charge that the batteries can have. There's I can't remember the term right now, but it's not hardening, but something like that. But basically, when you do the chemistry and you put them all together, they're really not chemically batteries quite yet. They have to sort of be charged up and discharged once or twice to kind of solidify and create like a film and all of this stuff between the anode and the electrolyte and the separator and the electrolyte and the cathode. All of that stuff has to become chemically mixed in the correct way. And part of that process is the charge-discharge cycle. And I know this because I saw that Tesla has a patent now that what they do is they utilize the charge from one set of batteries. So if you got one wall of batteries, right, that's charged up and you've got another that needs to be charged, they actually transfer the power. So they charge the new batteries using the old ones, which reduces the power requirements to do this. Because if you can imagine, megawatts full of battery supply, it takes megawatts to charge them up. So what Tesla's doing is they're bootstrapping it, right? So they're using, and if let's say it's 80% efficient, they can use 80% of the power that it takes to charge up these batteries can come from these old batteries as they discharge them, and then 20% more has to come in off the grid or something. So yes, they definitely do that, and that's every single battery, because the batteries they're not functionally batteries until you've done that to them. So that's definitely one part. I don't know that that's called validating. What I assume is that they do something where they actually do pull out one out of every 1,000 or some percentage that they randomly select, and they test those to more, stringent tests. And I think I know that they validate their motors, right? Like the Plaid Model S, what they've done is they've taken the motors that they use. That may be a different one, but maybe the long range Model S might be a better indication of that. But basically what they do, no, sorry, the performance ones. That's what I was meant to say. So you have a Model Y. So I have a Model Y, right? And it's a regular long range Model Y. Then there's a performance Model Y. And what happens is that they test the motors out, right? So I've got 2 motors in my car. But those got tested up to a certain level, and they were like, sure, it passes fine, it's whatever. But what they'll do with a performance model is they take the top rated motors. So they take the ones that really performed well and really did well, and those are the motors that they stick in the performance. So I imagine that they might have something like that with batteries as well. They may test them more stringently for their more higher range vehicles. I'm not sure about that, but it would be something that would make sense since Tesla already does that. But I would imagine that what they're doing in terms of just validating the cells to make sure they're okay and the chemistry is okay and everything is they probably pull out, say, 1 out of every 1,000 or something, and they test it. So that would be my guess. So I do know some things about that, but I don't know particularly what they do to validate individual batteries. All right, next question. Where is Tesla in 10 years? Technology, company-wise, not the stock. Okay. Oh, Rubik's, sorry, this is Rubik's that is asking this. So where is Tesla in 10 years? So 2031, I think that they are, my guess is that they're going to be somewhere around 15% globally in terms of market share for EV, vehicles. And that would be probably by then, definitely by then, including trucks, vans, semi-trucks, cars, and maybe some other form factors. I don't think Tesla's ever going to do a motorcycle or anything like that, but I think they'll have like 15% transportation. And remember, by 2031, I expect that most of the world is going to be driving EVs. So that is a huge amount. So that's 15 to 20 million of these cars they'll be producing every year. As for technology-wise, I think that they will have certainly the Tesla Bot available by 10 years from now. I expect that they'll have initial versions of that by about 5 years from now-ish. So that will definitely be happening. And if the Tesla Bot is successful, and if it does what Tesla wants it to, then that's going to dwarf the automobile industry. That's going to be the big thing. Tesla will also be way big into mining. Tesla will also be way big into power production. And I think a lot of the power, actually going back to that previous question, a lot of the power is going to start to be generated in a more diffuse, localized manner, right? So solar cells will become inexpensive and efficient enough that most people can afford to put them on their roofs. And that's going to distribute the electrical system out. And that's a really good way of taking the load off of the electrical grid in a very sustainable manner, right? So if you have 1 or 2 EV cars and you have a solar panel, big thing on your roof or a solar roof or something, you can charge those cars up during the day using that solar power, or alternatively, you can power your house and then charge it over the grid, and you can use batteries. So I think that'll be part of what they're doing. But I think if the Tesla Bot is as successful as people are saying, and as I think it's going to be, that's going to be so world-changing that it's going to be their major source of income. Even though they will be less expensive than automobiles, I'm not sure how much less. People keep talking $10,000. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Tesla Bot's going to be more expensive than 10 grand. I think it's going to be closer to $50,000, like a car at the start at least, just because there's so much in there that they'll have to work on that'll be very expensive. But anyway, maybe they'll have a Tesla Bot Lite for like 10 grand or 5 grand that you can have in your house, and it can do light duty tasks and things. I don't know. But anyway, I think that that's going to be a huge part of their business. And then also AI. I think that they will do AI as a service, AIAS. They'll do, AI as a service. And what that means is that they will be not only selling time on their Dojo, 3.0 computer, but they will also just sell it. They'll have neural networks, and people will say, I want to be able to do this. And Tesla will go, let us sick our AI team on it. And they will do that, and they will produce some sort of trained model that people can then have. And I think that'll be really cool. So I think that'll be another huge sort of income/technology source for Tesla. All right, then we have Dusty, who asks, how will Beta's new planning or guessing of curb lines when partially obstructed affect winter snowy conditions, since curbs, lines, etc. are often obstructed. Sometimes we have to just drive in the ruts of other cars. They do winter testing here in northern Minnesota. I'm sure they do. Does beta adjust for bad weather, rain, ice, snow, for how fast it thinks it can stop, or other cars can stop, maybe based on wheel traction data also? So 2 related questions there. So basically this is all about bad weather. So I think I'll start with the second one, maybe about the traction control. I would imagine that the car, essentially if it sees that it's in snow or rain or ice or something like that, and the fact that it probably has a lot of sensor data from its tires, will make adjustments on that. I would certainly hope so. I've had the car for a while, but I didn't use, the only time I was in snow was when we were in North Carolina last year and I drove it myself. I didn't trust the full self-driving beta to do that, the full self-driving regular version. But anyway, so I don't know myself, but it definitely is, it's not just an all-wheel drive car, but it is an all-wheel drive car, but basically it's got so much traction control that even driving in what kind of conditions, like really heavy rain or ice or snow, it's very, very solid on the road. But I would certainly hope that the beta versions at least will be taking account of how far behind other cars they are based on the expected stopping distance. I would hope that that's the case. I don't know that's the case. As for, knowing about snowy conditions and driving in ruts and stuff, that's actually a really interesting question. They didn't, of course, talk about this during AI Day. They did talk about snow falling off of other cars, but one of the things you could certainly do in their simulator would be to simulate a road that was completely buried in snow and just had the ruts. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, so we had plenty of snow. And what happens is the road surface disappears, and what you have is you have these ruts. Or sometimes, if you're lucky, the snowplows come through, and at least you've got a basic idea of where the road is. But the worst case conditions, you just have kind of indentations where the tire tracks are from the car in front of you. And the really worst case is if it's a blizzard, you can just barely see the 2, brake lights of the car in front of you. And so you kind of follow that and hope you don't run off the road together. But anyway, so that's really extreme. But I think that certainly there's no reason why these things cannot be trained on those winter driving conditions where there are just those ruts and you don't see the edges of the road. So I'm hazarding a guess because, again, I don't know the internal data of what Tesla is doing, but I do know that they test in snowy conditions, and I think it would be completely ridiculous if they're going for level 5 autonomy if they're not training to drive in those sorts of situations. So it's just like driving on a road, right? It's just a different kind of road. So you identify it as tire tracks, you identify it as snow, and you go for it. So I think that there's no reason why they can't train for that, and I think that it would be foolish of them not to train for that. So absolutely, I'll give that 99% odds that they're doing that for sure. And then the last question, my goodness, this is a long one. I'll see if I can get through here. So Dusty says, from a YouTube commenter, George Head, must be George Hotz. Autocorrect, yay. He can make sense of what giant computer like Dojo will do to train AI, but how is that shrunken into a small enough program to run on the car's computer? Maybe a good analogy would be that multiple people and massive computers are needed to build and render a video game, but to play it, you can be done on a PC or an Xbox. And then the Wiz sort of answers that saying Dojo is just there to simulate and train and test what will be on the computers thousands of times a minute. What's done on Dojo is not what's done on the car per se. And then says, would it be easier to compare Dojo to the Matrix and Dojo in the Matrix? Great thumbnail. By the way, I've already done that, right? I had that episode of Elon Musk, that's actually Keanu Reeves, that's Neo from the Matrix doing his whole thing, but he's holding the Dojo chip. So anyway, okay, George Hotz, I'm assuming it's George Hotz. I don't know a George Head, so anyway, and I'm 12 years old, I can't, gosh, it's so bad. Anyway, so I think what they're asking here in this little conversation that's going on is Dojo is a massive supercomputer. It's not online yet, but let's take the prior version of it right now, the NVIDIA-based supercomputer they have. This is a massive supercomputer cluster with huge data storage, huge processing capabilities, et cetera, and they can run giant neural network models on this. So obviously your car with its 2 little baby full self-driving computer chips on it is not going to be able to operate like a supercomputer. That's just the way it goes. Even my, desktop or laptop computer over there that I'm going to to edit this video on is not capable of doing that. So there's a huge difference between what a supercomputer can do and what a portable computer can do, like what's in your car. But from what Andrej Karpathy has talked about in presentations that he's done, and I'll link these up here, I've got a whole playlist on Andrej, that basically what the computer is doing, or what they're doing, is they're refactoring it. So they have a neural network model that's really, really big, and this is an analogy, it's a volume analogy. It's like a really big neural network model. What that means is it has hundreds of millions of tunable parameters, and I just did a thing on data labeling. In fact, the last video I did, if you're interested, and I talk about these parameters that you can tune. But anyway, it has those tunable parameters, but it has a lot of those tunable parameters, hundreds of millions of those. And it probably has things like drop layers, and it has other things like skip layers, et cetera, et cetera. So they've got a lot of stuff that's in this neural network model that is not necessary for the deployment model. So you've got a training model, and then you've got a deployment model. And the deployment model, you can cut a lot of this crap out of. But beyond that, it's still going to be too big to fit in the full self-driving memory capacity and the compute facilities. So you have to do other things, which would be refactoring. For people who know code, when you refactor code, it kind of rewrites it. If you get an automatic tool, it's really nice. But it can basically take really complex code and it can refactor it down to something simpler. I don't know how they do this with neural networks. It's very cool that they can do this, but definitely Dr. Karpathy has said that they do this. They refactor neural network models. So they take these complex neural network models and they kind of shrink them down. So they get rid of a lot of the parameters, and how they do that without losing functionality is a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, but they're able to shrink it. And I think what they probably do is they look for parameters that don't really matter that much. You can change this parameter and nothing really happens, so you can toss it, right? So you're losing some of the perfection of this entire thing, right? It's not going to be quite as good at modeling everything as it was before. But like I say, often, as long as the car is within a couple of centimeters of where it needs to be, it's totally fine for full self-driving. It doesn't have to be exactly in the right spot. It just needs to be close to the right spot. So everything is good. So basically what they're able to do is take this giant model like this, and by throwing away a bunch of the training stuff that they have in there to train it, that shrinks it down a little bit, and then they refactor it and it shrinks it down a lot. And that's what's actually being deployed and run in your car if you're driving full self-driving. So that's the difference between those two. So again, Dojo supercomputer, whatever supercomputer is running this, is running a much, much bigger neural network model than what your car is running. But the car is still running the basics of that. It's still running the thing that was trained, of course. Obviously, it has to, or else it can't work. Also, remember that training has to go through thousands of cycles to learn things, epochs. But your car only has to do that once every, 1/30th of a second or something like that. So it's only having to do the deployment version of this. So it's not having to run nearly as complex of a code. It's not having to back propagate all of the errors. It's just taking what it's given and it's running it. So that's much more like, with a human being doing it, it would be the difference between me as a human being, like writing code and working on it and debugging it and all of that crap, right? So that would be analogous to training the neural network model. And then the actual running of the code, and I think actually they talk about the to build and render a video game, right? So you've got all that stuff, debugging, you've got hundreds of people working on the video game, and they're working on the graphics and they're working on the game engine, and all of those things are going on. But then when it gets done, it gets mushed down into something that can run on just a PC or an Xbox or a PlayStation or something, right? So it's much, much smaller. So it's a pretty good analogy, actually. I like that. So in the end, after talking about it ad nauseum, I come back to that. So analogously, it's like building the video game and all the tools you need to do that, and how many people and how much processing power and all that, down to actual processing power and memory requirements of the actual game itself. So that's a very good analogy. It's not perfect, but that's a reasonable way to think about that. All right, whew. It was like 45 minutes of recording time. I'll probably cut a few things out in the meantime, but wow, that was a lot. Let me know definitely in the comments if you enjoyed this episode and you want to see more of these, because I think this is kind of cool. I love to be able to answer questions. And of course, to my patrons on Patreon, this is a way of saying thank you. So if you're interested in joining, definitely check out the link and you can ask me questions too, and then maybe I'll answer them in the next one of these. But definitely let me know if you enjoyed this episode. If you did, definitely like it so other people can find it. And of course consider subscribing for more of this kind of stuff. And if you're interested in some awesome merch, check out the link in the description. We've got the Tesla Bot t-shirt, which is super popular these days. Don't mess with Tesla. Lots of other t-shirts, tumblers, mugs, etc. So check out the link in the description and help the channel out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how clicking on the link and going shopping for a Tesla, a Powerwall, a solar roof, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. And as always, feel free to ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is drknowitallknows@gmail.com. Till next time, bye-bye.